Hello and welcome back to another video in the Complete Web Dev series. Let me move my microphone a little bit closer. Sorry about that. Hopefully that'll sound a little better. So where we left off in the last couple videos with React. So in this chapter, I guess I should say that we are working and learning on React.js, which is a front-end JavaScript framework. It was developed by Facebook and made available open source, so we can install it through Yarn or NPM and package managers such as that. But we have, in the first couple videos, what we have accomplished so far is we have went ahead and created a React app using React scripts. And we have our local dev environment up and running. We've also made sure that we have the Node.js server up and running that we built in the last chapter, so make sure you have that. And also, if you're new here, we are using Xampp on our local machines. In this case, really all we're doing with it is running MySql. So we have a MySql database for our Node server to run on. All right, so the other thing that we did is we started talking about React Router to kind of show how a single page application works. Since it doesn't actually make requests when you change the route, we need a way to route through those requests and add those changes to the browser history, so that if they hit the back button or the forward button, that it works correctly with the single page application. And what we've used with that is React Router. So we've started building out our main menu, and right now it does change the browser history and updates the URL, but we haven't done much more than that. And I want to slow down and let's talk about some very basic things in React. And so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to build our first component. Now, we've built some stuff before, but I didn't expect you guys to really understand what was going on at that point. We were just kind of following the motions just to get the project rolling. But in this video, we're going to dive in. We're going to create a component that is a reusable piece of code that we can use everywhere in our application. So we're going to build our button component now, and we're going to add some fail safes around it to help us know if we forget to do something with it that it needs in order for it to work. So let me switch over to my screen here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead, and we probably don't need to do this. We probably don't need to run our API in this video. It's fine if you already have it up and running. The other thing that we're going to do is on a separate tab here, what I'm going to do, navigate to the root directory here. And what I'd like to do is get my my server up and running for my local environment. And to do that, I simply just need to type npm start. And you can see that this runs React script start, and it starts a development server. Now this is going to open up my default browser there, but it opens your default browser on port 3000. And once this is up and running, you can see any warnings that we have or anything like that. Don't worry too much about that right now. You may have different warnings or may not have any warnings at all if everything is new on your box. But you can see that this is running now. So I'm going to go to another terminal here, and let's just make sure this is up and running. Go ahead and go to your browser and refresh on localhost 3000. You should see our menu from the last video. Once you're here, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new branch here to work on. So I'm back on my master branch. I'm just going to checkout -b, and I'm going to create a v3 because this is video number 3 in a series. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that up so that you guys have access to it. Upstream origin v3. And I'm going to go ahead and clear that. So now we have a new branch that we're working on for this video. You guys can get that from GitHub. At the end of this video, anything that we do in this video will be updated there. The first thing that we should do, I think, is let's go ahead and create a place for us to store these reusable components. So we have in our directory structure here, we have source, and we created this components directory once before. So let's go ahead and go into that. And I'm going to create a new folder in here that I'm going to call elements. You could call this whatever you want, but basically what I'm going to do here is create basic elements that we might use in our application on in multiple places. So inside of elements, I'm going to create a new file, and let's create a file called button.js. Now it's important that we create JavaScript files. Okay, now you could create JSX files. I prefer to create JavaScript files here. So we're creating JavaScript files in this elements directory here. And so there's a couple things that we need to do. Essentially, a component is going to be, since we're using functional components, it is just going to be a function that gets called. And because we're using JSX, we'll be able to use this in a really cool way. So let me show you what I mean. The first thing that we need to do, we actually don't have to import React up here like this. If we were doing class-based components, you would have to import React from React. So I'm going to go ahead, and while we're making a really simple, while we are working on a super simple app component, I think I'm going to show you both ways to create a component, okay? So the first way, and the way that we're going to be using in this application, is to create, we're going to create a const. And we're just going to call that button, and we're going to set that equal to a function, just like this. So we have const, and this is a ES6 type layout for a function. And the prop that gets passed in here, or the parameter that gets passed in this function, is a parameter called props. Now we haven't talked much about props yet, but we're going to get into that in this video. So for now, don't worry too much about that. But to do something, I need to return something here in order for us to be able to have something put on the screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a return, and we're going to use parens here if you're going to use multiple lines, which I like to do just to make it look a little cleaner. You could do it all in one line, but that's not very cool. But what we're going to return here is we're going to return a button. This button we're going to make more complex as we go, but for now, let's just put some text in here, and we're going to talk all about props. But for now, it's just going to be a button, and it's going to have a label of text. Then what we need to do is, in order for us to be able to use this button outside of this file here, we need to export this with modules. So what we're going to do is type export, and then we're going to do a default button. Okay, now this right here is a very basic, about as simple as it can get. In fact, the only thing simpler I can do here is remove props from that, because we're not using that. Now, I created this component, and you're not going to see a button on the screen. You're not going to see a button on the screen because we're not using this anywhere on our screen. So let's go ahead, now that we have our most basic and simple button, let's just open up for now. Go ahead and navigate to your app index file. And right here underneath where we add the main nav, we're going to want to use this button. But first, we're going to need to import that button. So we're going to import button from, and then we're going to tell it where we're getting it from. We're going to get it from components /elements /button. Now you don't type in button.js here on this import, you just type in button, just like that. Okay, once we've done that, this is kind of grayed out because we're not using it anywhere, but right here underneath our main navigation, let's go ahead and use our button. And the way we use it is we're going to call it by the same name that we imported it from, which, because we exported this as a default, anything that we import here without putting in curly brackets, we could actually do we could even do this, where we called it something different. As long as we're getting it from the same file, and I can actually call it like this now, and that will work as well. So let's go ahead now and refresh here. And we're not seeing the button here. Let's see, that's because app index. Why am I not seeing this? It's gonna be a CSS thing. One second, let me just double check, make sure it's not on the screen behind my menu or anything weird like that. Or I could be making some sort of really weird mistake here. Oh, it is there. So we do have a button and it's in the top here. So we're going to need to do a little bit more work for us to be able to see this. So go to the app index here, and underneath the main nav, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a div. And then we will put that button inside that div right there. Okay. And I don't think this is going to work yet because we don't have any CSS that's going to, because this main menu is fixed positioning. So let's go ahead and open up that. So go to public styles, app.css, and what we ultimately need to do is create a container for our stuff to live in. And so what I think we'll do here is let me open up my reference here. I don't want to write a bunch of CSS right this moment. Yeah, let's create up here above our nav styles, right underneath this .app. Let's just create a class here called main content. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to give this some margin top, and we're going to set that equal to the same height of our navigation, which was 55 pixels. The next thing that we're going to do is give this some padding of 28 pixels, and that'll just give it some breathing room. If I go and refresh now, nothing's going to happen, of course, because we need to add this main content class to our div that we just added here. So if we go here and we add class name, and we give this a class of main content, and boom, you can see that we have a button here that just says text. What's really cool is I can add multiple of these buttons like this. I could add multiple buttons and they're just going to keep adding them to the screen. Now these buttons are in fact set to an inline style, so they're just stacking like this. But you can see the power of creating a component that is reusable in our application just by calling its JSX equivalent tag. So this is the beauty of JSX, is I have what looks like the syntax for HTML, but is rather JSX, and it's going to call an instance of this function every time I use that anywhere in my application where it's imported. So as to not confuse you, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this back to the proper spelling of button here. And of course it's going to break this because now we have those other versions. But let's go now, and I promise that I'm going to show you how to create this as a class-based component. So let me show you that now. If I were going to create this as a class-based component, we would basically we need to create a class. Okay, so we're going to export a class, and let's call this one just BTN. Okay, so we're going to have two versions of this, BTN. And what we need to do here, which is going to be a little bit more code than this, is we need to extend a React component. So this will extend. So you type extends, and this is just like object-oriented programming. So this button is going to be a child class of a React component. So we would type react.component like that, and this is our class. And then since it's exporting this, now we'll have access to this already. So we're doing this all in one line instead of adding it down here. But we are exporting a class called button. Now, we can't just do a return here, because with a class-based component, we have to run a method. And this method is called render. And it does exactly what it sounds like it does. A render method, let's see. So we have a render method, and inside that render method, we're going to return. And in this case, what I want to return is just our button with text. So you can see at a glance that these two components are equivalent. This is a functional component, or a function component, and this is a class-based component. They're going to work very similar. There are some differences. As you can see, the syntax is a little bit different, and admittedly this one looks a little messier than this. This is very streamlined and clean. It's just a function with a return in it. But classes, since you're instantiating an object, this will allow for a lot of flexibility and power when doing things. For example, there's some really cool lifecycle hooks that class-based components have. Like, for example, I would have one called component will mount, okay, which they don't recommend using anymore, but we can even do a component did mount like this. We could do, there's another lifecycle hook that component will unmount. There's another lifecycle hook called component did update. And there's, you know, there's also a constructor that you can call. So you can do constructor. And you can, the thing is, if you call a constructor in your child class, you still need to construct the parent class. So in order to do that, it's going to pass in the props, and you have to call super props. And what that does, am I crazy? Constructor, I might be, maybe my IDE is just going a little slow on the syntax highlighting. So what this super props does, if you wouldn't normally, you don't need to call this unless you need to do something as it's being constructed. Like if I want to, for example, do something like this value is equal to, you know, 123 plus props dot value or something crazy like that, where we're setting a value on this class. But then down here, I could do something like, you know, value is equal to, and then in curly brackets, I could do something like this dot value. So this is kind of the workflow that you have when you're building a class-based component. You have some really cool things at your disposal that you just have to do a little bit different and think a little bit different when you're using functional components. So this is more of a traditional React way of doing things. They have since kind of went hard into the functional programming, for better or for worse. So this is what we're doing in this course. So, but let's go ahead and just show an example of using this class-based component just to show you what happens. So if I go here now, a couple things. One, I want to go ahead and use it, and I want to have my original and the new one. So what I can do is, since this isn't the default thing that's being exported, it's going to have to use the exact name. I could do an alias here and just call it as B if I want, but if you do this, it's going to get this also imported from the same file. So then I can use that down here like this. You call it exactly the same, whether it's a functional component or if it's a class-based component. But if we go now and look, we have two identical components, and this second one is of course our class-based component, and this first one is our functional-based component. Now if you're confused between the class-based stuff and the functional stuff, don't worry about it too much. You're just learning, but just know that this exists, because you're going to see in some libraries and in some examples, you're going to see both ways of writing components. And I just wanted to make you aware of how this works. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that class-based one for now. You know what? I might leave it in on this branch just so that we can so that you guys can see the code. So I'm going to leave it in on this branch, but in future branches, it will be gone and it won't be on master either. All right, so we have these two buttons now on our screen, but we're going to focus on this first button. And so let's talk now about something called props. So you know, when we call this function right here, we have the parameter that we can pass in, and the parameter we can pass in here is props. All right, and props is really cool because I don't want all these buttons to say text. I want it to have them say different things, right? Because what use is a component if you can't do anything unique with it, right? So what you can do is you're going to use curly brackets here in between these two. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in, just for now, just to show you this, I'm going to type in props dot label or something like that. Okay, so props dot label. So props is an object, and we're going to create a label property on this props object. Okay, so let's go and show you how that works. So if I go to app index now, the way that I would pass a property here is just like how you would pass, well, in fact, we're doing it right here with this class name, but I can just give it an arbitrary attribute here that is called a prop in React. And so we're going to call this label. And inside this label now, we're going to give it some text on this button. And we're going to say button 1. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another button right down here, and we're going to say we're going to give this one a label equal to button 2. Okay, so now if I go and refresh, you're going to see we have 3 buttons on our screen. Remember, this last button here is our class-based component, and we're not doing anything special with that, but now we have 2 buttons that are calling the same component, but the text that's inside of those buttons are different. And what allows those to be different is we're passing into, this is called passing a prop into this component. And then in that component, we are consuming that through this props parameter, okay? And then we can use that with this syntax here, props.label. We're gonna do something a little bit different though. Rather than passing in props.label, what I'd rather do, I think, is I'd rather have the ability for us to do something like this. Instead of us passing just text in, we might want to have a more complex thing passed in. For example, we might want text and we might want some sort of icon. So what you can do is you can have an opening and a closing button tag here, and then we can have children, what is known as a child, inside of these buttons. So I could do all kinds of stuff in here. I can make, you know, we could put divs in here. We can do whatever we want. But in this case, I'm going to type in button 1 here, and then I'm going to get rid of this label on the second button to make it the same as the first one, and then we're going to just pass in button 2 here. Now, if all I were going to do is have text anyway, I would probably just go ahead and use a prop to do this, but we can just pass stuff in like this. And what's really cool is when we do this, we have access to it still in props, but instead of us doing props.label, we're just going to do props.children, just like that. And children's reserved. And you can see that the effect is the same, but let's go ahead and make it just a little bit crazier here. I'm going to add, inside of this, I'm going to add a span. Okay, and in this span, we'll do a space, and we'll do like some sort of like percent thing there or something like that, right? So you can see it's already updated here that now we have a space percent, and if we inspect this now, you can see that inside the button we have text, and then we have this. This you can do with props, but this starts to make a lot more sense to use this sort of layout if you're going to be doing complex things passed in here, because some components you're going to have like a bunch of other JSX tags or other stuff like that within the component. So then you can just use this props.children. All right, so that's what that means. Let me go ahead and show you how this works with the class-based component here. And in this case, it would be the exact same thing, but you access props inside of a class-based component because this is instantiated. You have to type this .props.children. Okay, so this is an instantiation of this button class, which extends React component. So now if I go in and we do the same thing for this button here, let me give it the closing tag here, and we're just going to say class-based component like that, save it, and now you can see that we have the exact same thing going on. So it's not really any different except for, you know, you would be calling this .props with a class-based component. I'm going to go ahead and put comment here, and this can be class-based component just here for example. All right, the next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and say, hey, we want our buttons to do something. Let's see, what do we want it to do? One good thing is we want all sorts of different colored buttons, right? We want like a dark button, a light button, a primary, a success, a danger. So we have all these variants that we want to create. So let's go ahead and make sure that we can have a variant on this. So what I want to be able to do is inside of our button, let me just go ahead and kind of get rid of these here so we can just work with one button at a time. So we'll do that. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to break this down to a couple lines here just so we can see what's going on easily. Okay, and inside of here, if I want to add props now, what you do is in the opening tag, you just put a space, and now we can add props here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a prop called variant, like this. And this is going to be a prop that we pass in to our buttons. And so one of them, let me see what all variants I added in the CSS. I don't want to steer us wrong. So it looks like we have a primary, a danger, and a secondary button that we're going to be using. So what I'm going to do is for the first one, we'll just call this primary. So that's going to be our variant, okay? Then what I'd like to do is up here, let's go ahead and in this button, right here above this return, I'm just going to console log props so we can see what props looks like. So if I go to the console now, inside the console you can see this props object because I console logged it, and you can see that the variant is primary and the children that gets passed in is button 1. All right, let me get a drink of water real quick, my mouth is so dry. All right, so now that we have we know that we have this variant passed in, I want to make sure that we don't have any shenanigans. Well, we'll fix that later. I was going to say I want to make sure we don't have any shenanigans where we forget to pass something in as a variant, and then it would break our component. So we're gonna protect against that in a little bit, and I'll show you that. But first, let's just go ahead and knock out some styling just so we can have some satisfaction on these buttons and how they look. So let's go ahead and go to your app.css and scroll down here, and let's go ahead and let's add a place for our buttons. So I'm going to create just a comment here to kind of separate the CSS out. All right, and underneath here, let's go ahead and create some buttons. And what I'm going to do is so that if we use these classes on links or we use them on actual buttons, I want them to look the same. So I'm just going to use this is keyword here. So is an anchor or an A tag or a button tag, and it has a class of button. I want to treat these very similar. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, by default, we're going to set a background color of let's do 888. All right, and then and in fact we do in fact have an 888 here with gray medium, so we could use a CSS variable there. So let's go ahead and do that instead. Let's use variable, and then we're going to say gray medium. Okay, and that is 888 in this instance, but if we change that later, you know, we might want that to match. And we're going to give this a border of 1 pixel solid, and let's use 555 on that. I don't think 555 was a no. We could set up a lot more variables, but let's just keep going here. I'm going to give it a font size equal to 16 pixels, and then let's do padding at 8 pixels. on the top and bottom, and let's just do 16 pixels left and right. And then let's soften it up a little bit and use a little bit of border radius. And I think we'll just use a 2 pixel border radius and just kind of soften the corners just a tad. And then we're going to make the default color of these things black, so we can actually use our variable, black. And then let's do text decoration none, so that if it's an anchor tag, it gets rid of that underline there. And then we're going to give this a font weight of bold. All right. So that's some text styling. And then let's just give it a little letter spacing, just to kind of spread out the letters a little bit. And we'll do 1 pixel there. Then what I want to do is I want to make sure that anytime our buttons are hovered over, the cursor turns to a pointer. So we can do an is here, and we'll say is button or anchor tag. And if it has the hover effect now, we're just going to change that cursor. In fact, we're going to change that cursor to a pointer, just like that. All right. I want to have another variation of a button that we can use for sizing called small. So what we'll do here is we're going to say is a button, and if it has a class of button --xs for extra small, then what we're going to do is we're going to change up the padding here, and we'll do 2 pixels and 4 pixels, and we'll do a font size of only 12 pixels, and that'll make a lot smaller button, so that extra small button there will work. All right, then let's use the same thing. We'll do a button here, and then we're going to check if it's a button -- primary, and this is where we're going to start coloring these things. So we're going to give it a background color, and we're going to use our main theme dark variable here. And then we'll give it a color, and in this case we're going to use our white. Okay. The next thing that we'll do is border color. And our border color, let's use our theme medium for that. All right. So that's going to be our button primary. We'll need to go ahead and do a hover state on that. So we'll do is a button dot button -- primary, and then we'll do our hover pseudo class there. And it's going to be background color var theme medium for that as well. And so now that'll take care of our hover. Let's just, before we get too far, let's go back to our button here. And what I'm going to do, we're going to hard code this class in here for now, just to see what it looks like. So let's give it a class of button and button -- primary. And then let's go and look here. So we can already see that our pointer's changing and the button is working here. Let's try out that button extra small just to see if that works. And you can see, yes, that is a much smaller button. So our classes seem to be working just fine here. I'm going to leave that just like that. So let's do our other styles real quick for our buttons. There's only a couple more. So let's go and do our, well, you know, I had a few more buttons than I originally let on in this. So let's do another version where it's dot button -- primary -alt, and in that case what we want to do is we are going to give it a color of a var, and we'll use white as well for the alt button, and the background color, let's use theme accent, and for the border color, let's use the theme accent as well. And then let's go ahead and do our hover state for this. So for the hover state, I think what we'll do, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. We're using Sass, this would be so much easier. And then I'm just going to add hover to that. And we're going to keep it at white, but we don't have these set up as variables for the background color. So in this case, I'm just going to hard code a 1F4 C75. Okay, and then for the border color, we're going to use the same thing, just like that. So we can test that out real quick by going to our button, and we'll just add primary-alt, just like that. And now you can see we have an alternative button color, that blue button right there. Let's go back to the app.css, and let's go ahead and add our danger and secondary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these two groups here, and I'm going to change primary in this case to danger and get rid of alt. And we'll do the same thing here, danger, get rid of the alt. So we have danger and danger hover. For the color on the danger, we're going to use white again. For the background color, we are going to go ahead and use the danger color. And same for the border color. And then for our hover, we are going to use white still. But for these colors here, we're going to go ahead and use 711616. I'm going to copy that because we'll use the same thing for the border. And then let's go and test that. So all we have to do here is change primary alt to danger. And now we have a danger button. All right, so then let's go ahead and do this one more time. I'm going to copy those two. And then instead of danger, we're going to call this secondary. Now secondary is going to get a color of black instead of white. We're going to make this a really light colored button. And then the background color, we're going to go ahead and use the gray medium. And then for the border color, we're going to use gray dark. Okay. And then when we hover, we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep the color white. And then the background color, we're going to make gray dark. And we don't really need to do a border color because it's going to be carried over from this. So let's save that and let's try out our secondary button. So I'm going to change danger to secondary, save that. And now we have this secondary button. Our hover doesn't seem to be working, so let's check that. Let's see, background color gray medium, hover gray dark. Do we have a gray dark? Did I spell that wrong? Gray dark is 333, gray medium is 888. What did I got going on here? I'm missing something. Let me inspect that. Whoops. And that is because I didn't change that danger secondary. I'm sure you guys caught on to that really quickly. Okay, there we go. There's a secondary button. All these buttons are kind of ugly. I don't expect you guys to be like, oh, that's so good looking or anything like that, but I did want to get some sort of styling going. Now, I don't think we'll do anything else with this CSS at the moment. Let's go ahead and make our button component better. So instead of hard coding this class right here, which in fact, it let us get away with it, but really we needed class name there. And it was probably a warning about it. Yeah, there was a warning right here just about that. So anyhow, you can see that now, but we don't want to hard code these buttons. What we'd rather do is create a variable here. So above the return here, I'm going to create a constant, and this constant is going to be called class. I'm just going to call it class with a K. And we're going to use a string literal here because we're going to kind of add a lot into this. So what I want to do here is do button, and then we're going to do button dash dash, and our variant's going to go right here. So we can use the JavaScript ability for us to do string literals here, and I'm going to do props.variant. So we're going to pass in that variant part. So that'll be either primary alt, danger, or secondary, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to add one more thing here. We want the ability to we want to be able to pass a class name into this component and add those classes right here. So the way that would work is we're going to do another thing here. We're going to say props.hasOwnProperty, and we're looking for class name. So if class names gets passed into this component, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and print class name right into this string. Else we're just going to add an empty string just like that. There we go. So now instead of this class name here, we're going to get rid of this string, and we're going to use the curly bracket syntax, and we're going to pass that class right down into that button like that. So let's go ahead and test this out now. And in our app index, we passed primary into this button. But what happens if we create another button? So let me copy this. We'll do that a couple times here. And this one we're going to say secondary. This one we're going to say our variant's primary alt, and this one is going to be danger. So if I save that now we have 4 different buttons that all have a different color. And so all we're having to do is pass in the variant of primary, secondary, or whatever, and now our button is becoming dynamic based upon props that we are passing down to it. Okay, so this right here, this is what allows us to do that. The other thing I'd like to be able to do is let's go ahead and do a size on here. And so in order to do this, let's make class instead of a constant. Let's create a variable out of that. And we can clean this up a little bit. So maybe what we'll do, this ternary operator being in line here is a little, might just be a little confusing for people who read it in the future. So what we can do here is we can just do an if statement, and we'll just say if props dot has own property, and if we're going to say class name there, and if that's true, then what we're going to do is we're going to take class, and we're going to concatenate onto that with plus equal, and we will concatenate on props class name like that. And then that allows us to get rid of this whole part of this string literal. And you know what, we probably want to, we need to add a space there like that. So in fact, maybe I'll leave it like that just to make it really easy to read. The other thing we want to do is I want to check if props.has own property, and this time I want to look for size, okay? And we're going to say if it has size and you know what, maybe we'll just leave this kind of open-ended. So if it has size, then what I want to do is I want to say class is plus equal, and we're going to add another space here, and then we're going to say you know what, we'll do a string literal on this one. We'll do a space, and then we'll say button dash dash, and then here what we're going to do is pass in props.size. So then what we could do with that is here in our buttons, we can add on this danger one or whatever, any of these we want, we can add size to it, and in this case we can do XS for extra small, and now we have an extra small danger button. We could do that with all of them or whatever, but if we don't want to make it extra small, we just don't pass that property in, and now our button is the same size as the rest of them. So that gives us just a little bit more variation that we can do with our buttons. So then what I want to do, and remember how I told you that we want to make sure that we pass in variant, because what happens, let's go ahead and do button here, and no prop. So what happened here is this button, well, let's go ahead and look at the console. So we don't have a variant. So there's a problem now, because now we have this button that doesn't quite match anything else. It's just wrong. Like this button, it looks pretty good because we have a default styles kind of set here, but we want to make sure that they have a variant. So the way that we can do that is in our buttons deal here. Oh, there's one more thing I want to show you real quick, just this kind of cool syntax. So you know how down here on this class-based component we typed react.component? Well, what we could do is we could do a comma here, and then we could put in curly brackets, we can just bring in component by itself, and then when we extend this button, we can just extend component. So that cleans that up just a little bit more. That was just back to the class-based component. But anyway, let's go look and see how we can clean up this button. Another thing we want to be able to do is pass in an on-click event. Okay, so on this first one, I'm going to say on-click, and on the on-click thing right here, I'm just going to do an anonymous function that does a window.alert, and we'll just say button clicked. All right, so then that's not going to do anything though. So what we have to be able to do is pass that on click down into this. So in order for us to do that, we're going to pass in on click into this button element here, and I'm going to do curly brackets, and we'll say props.onClick. All right, so whatever gets passed down into this props as an on click, it's going to happen when they actually push this button. Okay, so let's go ahead and push that, and when you see when I push it, it says button clicked. But what happens when we click the rest of them? Uh-oh, it's not doing anything, and we got 5 warnings here. It's saying that the expected on-click listener to be a function. Instead, it got a Boolean, which it probably just means false there, or null. So that's no good. So we're going to fix that too. We're really close to being done with the video here, but let's show you how we can foolproof this component a little bit. So what we can do is we can use something called prop types. And in order to use prop types, we need to import it. Now, prop types is it came with when we installed React with React scripts. It came with that. So some sort of library that we installed requires prop types. So we're going to get prop types from prop-types like that. So this is the name of the library. This is the name of what we're going to be using. Okay. So the way that we use this is we, underneath the declaration of how we're creating this const here, we're going to go ahead and do button dot, and then we're going to say button dot prop types like that. And then what we could do is set that equal to an object, okay? And now what we can do is we can make sure that they pass in variant. So if we do this, we're gonna say, hey, make sure that variant is passed in, and it is going to be a prop type of string, so it needs to be a string, and it is required. Okay, so this is a syntax that comes with this prop types here, and it's saying like, look, we need a prop called variant, and this must be a string, and it must be required. Okay, so now what happens is I'm gonna go ahead and refresh, and it says failed prop type. The prop variant is marked as required in button, but the value is undefined, and that's because back in our app.index we did have one button without a variant. But if I add that variant now, and we'll just do another primary button here, and we'll save that. If I clear the console and refresh, you can see we have no more warnings there. And that's because now all of them have a variant, and we wanted to make sure that. So that's what this prop types does. We can also do it with the onClick. So I'm going to add another one for onClick. And onClick, we're going to say, look, this is going to be prop types, and we want this to be a function. Okay. So it has, and I got the wrong thing. It has to be a dot, and I typed out function, but actually their syntax is func. So if you go and just search up prop types library on npm, you'll get some documentation that shows you all of these different prop types that you can use. But we're going to say it's a function, so they have to pass in an onClick function. Otherwise, we're going to get these warnings, right? So let's refresh. And why isn't that working? Oh, because we don't have is required. So let's also add .is required right there. And now you can see that I got a warning saying that the onClick is marked as required, but it's missing. Okay, and so we have to have an onClick button there. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna leave that. And what we're gonna be able to do though is we can define default values on these. So one way to do that is we can use button dot default props, and it's going to be an object as well. And now here we can define those same props like this. So now what we can do is we're gonna do the same thing I think for onClick. But for onClick, what we'll do is we'll just pass in an anonymous function. So this is going to be a function. However, it's not a big deal if we don't pass one in. So let's just try that out now. If I go back to app index, and we'll remove this variant primary here from the last one, and we don't have an onClick on any of these. So let me clear my console here and refresh. And now you can see we don't have any warnings. And this last one here is actually a secondary button. Had I made this in the button.js, this variant, I can make this a primary alt by default. And if you don't pass one in, did I spell that wrong? Primary alt. There we go. So now our default is this primary alt one if I don't pass in a variant to the button object. The same thing could be true like on this onClick here. We could do a window.alert. If we could say, you forgot your onClick function, bro. And now if I refresh this, the first button we did pass one, and it says the button's clicked. If I click another one, it's going to say, hey, you forgot your onClick function, bro. So the rest of them will do that because we didn't pass an onClick prop down for any of these other buttons. Okay, I'm going to go ahead though, and I'm going to just send that back to an empty anonymous function, just so it satisfies our is required. Now it's a little funky because these is required right here, since we are using defaults, these is required make sure that there's something there. In fact, it's still going to make sure it's a function. Even we could screw that up there. So this is still helpful. It just helps us not break any other code. So again, let's just really quickly look through this. We got this is the actual component. And then we're using the prop types, and we're making use of default props and prop types to make sure that props that we expect this function needs to be passed in, like variant and onClick, is indeed passed in. And if they don't pass it in, we're going to go ahead and set some defaults. And so on this, I'm actually going to set a default of secondary, because I'd like that to be my default button if nothing is passed in, like primary or primary alt. This part here is completely unnecessary. I just put it in here so you guys can see a class-based component. I will be getting rid of that. But then this line here on 37 exports our default button so that we can import that just like this. So it'd be import button from that file here. Okay, this part here was our class-based component that we had imported. Now it's giving us a warning because we have not used it in this file. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that from the import statement just to get rid of that warning there. And now you can see that we have no warnings, and these buttons are they are working as expected. Okay. All right, guys. Well, that is the basics of how we create a reusable component in React that we can use everywhere else in our application like this. Okay. Now the thing is, you're gonna look at this and you'll be like, wow, that is so much more complicated than just typing some HTML and some freaking CSS and a little bit of JavaScript, and you would be right. This is a lot more complicated, and it's also, you know, it's just more code. Like, why would I do this? I write this huge JavaScript file here to create a button, and then we're doing some checks to make sure, and then we have to export it and we have to import it everywhere. What is going on with that? Why would we do that? Well, the good news is this actually makes development, it's slower in the beginning, but development gets faster. It also makes your application a lot more consistent because you're going to be using these components, and things are just going to kind of fall into place and be a lot more consistent throughout your application. And more importantly, it allows us to build these single page applications that don't need to be refreshed, and content is really easy to update, as you will see later on. When we get information back from our API endpoints, we can just tuck stuff into data, and the React application, which is what it's great at, will actually, everything on the screen will actually react if it needs to and re-render the functions that we're looking at, potential data that has updated. For example, if I had a table that had a row for each row in my database, and then I did an API call, and now there's a new row in the database, well, now I would either have to refresh the page, I would have to send all the HTML back through Ajax or something like that, and then plug it into the page. But instead, what I can do is just update the data that's stored in React, and now the component will re-render, and it's not going to re-render the whole page. It's only going to re-render or redraw the part of the browser that needs to be redrawn, because it does take a lot of time when you have a complex application in the browser has to draw every element. It has to check the CSS and everything like that. So React, what it does is it keeps a copy of the DOM in the background running. Is called like a shadow DOM or something like that. And what it does is it updates the shadow DOM, and then it compares the actual DOM to the shadow DOM and only redraws what has changed. So that considerably speeds up the time of drawing the elements on the screen for the user. All right, guys. Well, I hope that some of this is making sense. Go ahead and leave me a comment if you've learned anything. And in the next video, what we're going to do is continue on with our application. We'll probably do a few more concepts of some simpler stuff, and then we're going to get right back into just right into headlong into the complicated stuff, so that you understand. And we'll do a lot of repetition so that things become really easy for you. All right, guys. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please comment, like, subscribe. You can support me on Patreon if you would like. Please don't support me if you don't have the money. I'd rather see you guys get yourselves under control. But if you are blessed and you want to bless me and help out what I'm doing here, that would be an honor. All right, guys. Peace out.